I love making applesauce. You can use it later on in the year for things like pancakes or just to eat it. It's really not that hard. All you have to do is, peel your apples. You need to take the peels off because if you leave the peels on there, the peels have kind of pectin on them. And the pectin will really ruin your applesauce because it'll just thicken it up and it'll be sort of like a jellyish applesauce. The texture is really, really bad. So you want to make sure you get it really nicely peeled. You can leave just a little bit, it's not a big deal, but don't leave too much on there. And then you want to cut it up. This is how I make it. I mean, you might make it different. You cut it up into good sized chunks. It doesn't really matter how big the chunks are really, because you're cooking it down. You'll notice that I'm putting the chunks in there little by little, and I have just a little bit of water in there just to make sure that nothing really happens to the apples so that they don't just cook off the bottom. But most of that water will just evaporate, so later on if you think you need even more water, just kind of keep adding it. I like the texture of continuously adding apples and having them cook at different times, because I like my applesauce to be a little bit chunky. If you don't like your applesauce to be chunky, then you might want to just put all of the apples in there with a little bit of water and then just turn on the water and then just let it go for a while. So it's really not that difficult. You don't even have to can it if you don't want to. You could just eat it. But I usually do both. I'll eat some and then I'll can some. You can add sugar and cinnamon. I usually don't add anything. I don't even add the sugar until I open the jar later on in the winter. Here's just adding more and more. Every time I add apples, I usually mix it a little bit. You'll see that some of the bottom there, some of the sauce is basically there. It's nice and beautiful texture. This is when it's almost done. There's really not much left to do here. I guess it really depends on how chunky you like it. What I usually do is I'll start putting the smasher, like the potato smasher, to mine. But if you like them even smoother than that, you could always do one of those soup blenders, and I bet you that would get it really, really smooth. Or you could just keep on cooking it for a really long time. I guess it wouldn't take that long. And it will get smoother and smoother over time. But I like mine about like this just because I like to be able to bite those apples when I eat my applesauce. So I'm gonna start the canning. My jars are hot. My jars have been in the dishwasher. They've been through the hot wash cycle, and they're right now in the middle of the hot drying cycle. So they're pretty warm and they're nice and sterile. I usually try to put my jars as close to the pot as I can, just because then you don't make as big of a mess. You put the funnel on there, you spoon the applesauce in there or whatever sauce you might be making. You want to ladle it up in there or spoon it in there until there's about 1/4 of an inch or so, 1/2 inch to 1/4 of an inch. This obviously isn't that, so usually I have to take a spoon. I use one of the larger eating spoons and it makes it pretty easy. I like applesauce too because it doesn't really get on the rim, which other things will. They'll drip on things, and this one doesn't. The glass rim's pretty nice and clean. Then I take the chopstick and I make sure that I get all the bubbles out of there. There's still gonna be bubbles. Even when you're done, there will be bubbles. But it's nice to try to get as many of them as you can. I've had lots of bubbles before and it's still fine. It doesn't go bad or anything. So if you have a couple bubbles in there, especially after you're done, if they just pop around there, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. You always have to clean the rim just so that there's nothing there that's gonna stop the seal from happening. My seals are nice and hot. I usually just keep those on low. Get my magnet so I don't burn myself. Put the seal right on there. And then I have the screw tops, and you don't want to put these too tight in there. Just until you start to feel a little bit of pressure, then a little bit more, and that's it. This pot is actually not that big. I should have a bigger pot. I think this is a 7-quart. I would probably use a 10-quart if I could, or even a 9-quart. But the reason why it's still okay for me to use this pot is because it's a pressure cooker, and so I can put the lid on there, and the lid holds the steam enough that it creates a high enough temperature above the jars. But normally you want a whole inch of water above the jars if you're trying to do this correctly and you don't have a pressure cooker lid that you can tighten down. So just screw it in there just a little bit, and then you seal it up, and it takes about 15 minutes for these to be done. On this, I think it's only about 15 to 20 minutes for these jars, for the quarts. If you were doing the pints, it takes a little bit longer than that. It might take more like 25 minutes, and it's pretty quick. I would just look at the recipes online or the Ball Blue book that comes with your canning supplies. You could always pick it up at Winco or at Rite Aid if you don't have a canning book. Again, you don't need a pressure cooker for applesauce. You can just do it on a regular one. So mine are done. It's been about 15 minutes. As you can see, it's still boiling right above them there. I usually take them out and put them on a towel. That's kind of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to put them somewhere where they're not going to get a lot of breeze. They're just going to be in a nice, stable temperature area. I always tip them a little bit to get some of that top water out, and carefully put them on the towel. And you don't want to touch them for the next 12 hours because you're not supposed to. See, I sort of dropped that one a little bit, but it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. Don't worry about it. And after about 12 hours of having them sit on the towel, what you want to do is you want to rinse the jars off. You can take the screw caps off. They should not have to be there. And you can also check them just by touching them on the top. And the seal shouldn't give. It should just be firmly down. It shouldn't be floppy at all. And you rinse the jars really well because they'll have a little bit of the sauce on the outside. They'll be a little sugary. And then once they're nicely rinsed and you dry them off, you put them in a box and they're ready for winter. That's pretty much it. Thank you.